brothers and sisters and comrades. I'm doing this pop-up as a matter of some urgency. We've seen indications that within the next several hours, there's a great possibility that I will be indicted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the United States, the FBI. This is a consequence, in part, an immediate consequence of an attack on my home, a threat to my life, the threat to the life of my wife, an assault on the properties and institutions and homes of members of the Uhuru Movement in 2 states, in St. Petersburg, Florida, and in St. Louis, Missouri, where I am currently residing. And this attack began on July 29th at 5 a.m. in the morning, Central Time in St. Louis, and 5 a.m., 6 o'clock, if you will, in St. Petersburg, Florida. And many of us in various places, various locations, were awakened by loudspeakers outside our homes, demanding that we come out with our hands up and empty, that this was the FBI that was assaulting us. They assaulted my home in St. Louis. They assaulted the office of the African People's Solidarity Committee, an organization that is an extension of our party that exists within the white community in South St. Louis, where the majority of the white people in this city live. They used battering rams to knock down doors. They used grenades, stun grenades, to frighten and terrorize people, not only in our particular homes where they knocked out windows and, as I said, knocked down doors, but to terrorize people in the entire communities, in the African communities when they came in the African community. They also attacked the home in St. Petersburg, Florida, where most of my political activity was centered for many, many years. And they knocked down doors despite the fact no one is there. They broke in and stole various kinds of materials. They stole computers and cell phones. And they did a similar thing to the home of young comrade leader of our movement, Akilia Nai, also known as Erica Anai Kenyon, where they used the police department to come and tell her that someone was breaking into her car, and using this deception to get her to come out of her house, so that when she left the house to go to the car, she was surrounded by FBI agents. Her cell phone was taken from her, and various other kinds of resources were taken from her at her home and at the Uhuru House in St. Petersburg, Florida, as I just mentioned earlier. And they went to the home of solidarity workers, white people in this instance, Penny Hess and Kitty Riley, and held them at gunpoint. And at the Solidarity Center in St. Louis, there's also an apartment above. They went into the apartment above and held the residents Jesse Neville and Amanda Carlozzi at gunpoint, handcuffing everybody and terrorizing many people, stunning many people with this assault. And when questioned about why it was they were doing this, they declared they were doing it because some kind of indictment was coming down against a Russian national who was living in Russia. And that in this indictment, my name was mentioned, along with 3 other people, Jesse Neville, Akilia Nai, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville, Penny Nai, Penny Hess, and myself, all of us were declared unindicted co-conspirators. They said that that the Russian national, Alexander Ayanov, was the primary target, but he was in Russia. And if he ever come to the United States, they were going to also lock him up, indict him, lock him up, etc. They warned me when they had us standing outside, me zip tied behind my back, my wife handcuffed. After they had commanded that we come outside, and I had come outside in the dark and to be confronted by an armored vehicle, surrounded by militarily attired agents, and with assault weapons pointed at me, and the laser dots bouncing off my chest, threatening my life. They warned us that this is going to make big news. This is going to be in the news. And of course, it did make the news. But they said that the reason they were doing this is because ultimately they said it. They didn't say right off what it was. Ultimately, they said that we were being charged with violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, something that they had used against W.E.B. Du Bois in 1951 when he was working for Black people. And they said that the evidence that part of the evidence that they have accumulated about violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, that we were actually working as foreign agents, that the work that we were doing in the Uhuru Movement was for the Russians. And they said the evidence of this activity of ours was in the employ of foreign agents is that in 2016, we did a tour of 4 cities within the United States to win African people to sign petitions charging the United States with genocide against African people. That is to say, charging that the United States was in violation of the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And they said that the reason we were doing this is because we were in the employ of the Russians, that the Russians paid us to do this. And of course, to say this is to suggest that there is no basis for African people to claim that genocide is being committed against us every day. And that our initial confrontation, our initial engagement as Black people with the United States constitute a part of the genocide that's committed against the African nation that has been forcibly dispersed all around the world after the attack on Africa. So there is no material basis for this claim. And if you read the Genocide Convention, you will see that there's nothing in that Genocide Convention that excludes what happens to African people. In fact, that African people meet the requirements of genocide according to the United States Convention more than anybody in this country except the indigenous people themselves. And they say this and they would ignore the fact that this Genocide Convention was passed at the United Nations in 1948. By 1951, Africans in this country with the document called We Charge Genocide that you can Google, went before the United Nations to get it to indict the United States government for the crime of genocide committed against African people. And that even after the passage of the Genocide Convention at the United Nations, the United States was an outlaw. It went for 40 years before it would even acknowledge the Genocide Convention and adopt the Genocide Convention in the United States Congress. And the basic reasons for them not wanting to adopt this convention was the crimes that they knew were being committed against indigenous people and African people. In other words, they were afraid that Black people in the United States and the indigenous people would be able to take the United States before the United Nations, charging them with genocide, and that there was ample evidence to prove that case. And so this was, and so W.E.B. Du Bois in 1951 was charged with the same crime that we have been charged with, characterized as violation of some Foreign Agent Registration Act. In this instance, Du Bois was just part of a movement calling for peace, trying to prevent war between the United States and Soviet Russia, as it was characterized at that time. And he was put on trial for that. Of course, Du Bois was able to beat the trial. But it didn't stop them from moving against Paul Robeson in that same time frame, who also participated in the We Charge Genocide work, and who also was somebody who was brought before the United Nations Convention, brought before the U.S. Congress and questioned if he were a member of the Communist Party, or if he ever was a member of the Communist Party, which they assume was controlled by Russia. There has never been an instance in the history of our existence in America where struggling for freedom was legal. In fact, every democratic right of Black people was struggling against the illegality of freedom. It was illegal to be free. Nat Turner in 1831, who led this incredible movement in Hampton, Virginia area for freedom, was put on trial. He broke the law. He was found guilty by the United States government, and he was executed for trying to be free. Every movement that we've had on plantations and everywhere to be free, freedom was illegal in the United States, but they've had this problem of trying to put themselves forth as this great democracy on the one hand, and on the other hand, killing Black people with immunity by mobs of white people, by the government itself, agents of the government, killing us, etc. How do you say then that this great democracy of America exists on the one hand, on the other hand, what you're doing to Black people? The fact that you've got concentration camps called Indian reservations, the fact that half of Mexico was stolen and the people from whom it was stolen are characterized as illegal aliens and punished every day on the border, but special police that's been set up for them. How can you justify that? It's a difficult thing for them to justify. Therefore, in order to justify what they've done is come up with this scheme that it is not Black people that we are fighting against. It is not the right of Black people to be free that we are dealing with. It's Russians that we are dealing with. That Black people can be free in the United States. If you don't believe it, ignore the fact that Assata Shakur is hiding in Cuba today. Ignore the fact that there are thousands of Black people who are locked up in prisons in this country today because of marijuana convictions. And look at what we've done with Brittany Griner. How Brittany Griner, we struggle against this oppressive Russia to say free Brittany Griner, who has admitted to bringing drugs into Russia, and show that fact that they arrested her as evidence of their bestiality and autocratic nature on the one hand, but on the other hand, we are good because we are calling for her freedom. And if Russia is autocratic, because as far as we know, one Black person in Russia has been imprisoned for marijuana conviction. If Russia is autocratic because of that, then what does that mean about America, who's got thousands of Black people right now locked up in prisons? And of course, what they're saying is that even to say this, even to raise this, even to criticize what's happening to Black people in this country is to be working for the Russians. It's illegal. You can't say this and we'll put you in jail. So on July 29th of last year, they attacked my home. They attacked 7 other properties. They attacked various members of our movement, institutions of our movement. They have threatened the existence of our organization. And of course, they are threatening assassination of me, not just because of what they did on July 29th with the laser dots in my chest, carried by military attired, swaggering forces from the FBI, not just because of that, but because I'm 81 years old. And right now they have mentioned some 3 charges, each carrying some 5-year minimum jail sentence, prison term. But they also said that it's wide open in terms of how many charges they can impose on us. So the objective is not just what they did on July 29th with the targets from the assault weapons in the hands of FBI forces, but to put me in prison. And to put me in prison under these charges, that means that I will never leave prison alive. That is part of what their objective. That is part of their objective. So they said we did this anti-genocide work. We said we'll take the United States before the United Nations charging it with genocide. We collected 130,000 signatures by African people, and all of them were stolen by the FBI. That these signatures that united with the fact that African people are victims of the violation of the Genocide Convention by the United States. So they said, this is why I'm working for the Russians. They didn't say and cannot say that genocide is not being committed against African people. In fact, they will liquidate that question so that you don't even get to that, because they say I'm working for the Russians. because it's the Russians who are saying this, that it was the Russians they were attacking in Redbud, one of the most economically depressed sector of St. Louis, and not black people in the struggle for black people. They would say it's not the Black Power blueprint institutions that we've created that's changing the actual lives on the ground of black people, creating institutions, bringing economic development, bringing aspirations beyond what have been prescribed by this government and our relationship to this government. It's Russians they're fighting. So although African people are starving, although we have in St. Louis a situation where there are enough African babies dying in the first year of life to fill 15 kindergarten classes, and the African People's Socialist Party is put on the ground, institutions challenging that, training something like 15, 16 African women to become doulas to help African women go through pregnancies and to save the lives of the babies as they are born. This is what they are attacking. But despite that reality, it's the Russians who are doing this, and that's the Russians they attack, despite the fact that in a community, as you know, Africans who are here, especially who live in the United States, where you see children, our children, having to play in the streets using bicycle rims in order to play basketball, where the Uhuru Movement has created an actual basketball court. We raised more than $130,000 from people who united to pay reparations to African people to build that basketball court. This is what we're doing, but this is what they will attack. This is the thing that they would attack without saying we're attacking black people's right, black children's right to live, black children's right to have a basketball court that contributes to that sense of dignity and value. This is not what they're attacking. They say they're attacking Russia. But of course, what they're doing is attacking that. They're attacking the actual right for black people to be self-determined, for black people to be self-reliant. And that's right here in the United States that's happening. Of course, this is something that they're doing throughout the world, throughout Africa and the rest of it. They say the charges that they are inferring against us say that we have a position on Ukraine that differs significantly from what the United States and Zuckerberg and a whole bunch of other people are promoting about how the poor Ukrainians have become victims of this autocratic Russia. And they would liquidate the history of that whole process of how the United States has been fighting against Russia now in one iteration or another for more than 100 years, having invaded Russia in 1918 after the success of a 1917 Russian Revolution that elevated working people in solidarity with the oppressed and colonized peoples of the world to a place of that they challenged the whole social system of colonial capitalism and offered the world a new vision. This is what the attack on Russia, this is when it started. And they would talk about the glorious Ukrainian movement, despite the fact that that part of that Ukraine has historically has contained Nazis who they say they hate, and as a part of that movement. But the fact is, beyond that, we know how this process has developed with the collapse of the Soviet Union, that the United States contributed in making by putting war on closer and closer to the Soviet border, with Afghanistan being one first, and then with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then moving further to the border of the Soviet Union, including Ukraine, which is what it was all about after the United States government facilitated the overthrow of the elected leader of Ukraine. This is part of the reality, and so we have a different opinion. But we had a different opinion on Vietnam too. Our opinion on Vietnam was different. Our opinion on the oppression of our people in Algeria was different from the United States. Our opinion on the position on the exploitation and oppression of African people in Cuba, the people in Nicaragua. We participated in supporting those people despite the position of the United States government. And then, of course, Rhodesia and South Africa and all those other places, we, the African People's Socialist Party, from our inception, the Uhuru Movement from its inception, took part in making this struggle and supporting people around the world. We supported the Irish, who were under direct colonial domination by the British. In 1983, I was in Ireland, in Belfast, that was occupied by British troops. And the Irish Republican Socialist Party stood with us as we stood with them.
and when I say us, I'm talking about with black people in this country, and made public statements that they would not accept any money from Irish in the United States, from Irish people who were opposed to the freedom of black people. They would not accept any money from African people, from Irish people who would reject the demand for reparations that was coming from African people. And they also said they would pursue, with using what means they had available to them, pressure on the United States to force the United States to sign the Genocide Convention that came from the United Nations. That's what our history is an international history of internationalism. And we've been on the front of that. And anybody who supported Vietnam, anybody who opposes the brutal murder that's occurring against the people in Afghanistan and other places around the world can be convicted, can be charged with the same thing we are being charged up with right now. Except if you are a supporter of the illegitimate white nationalist settler state of Israel, which has various organizations that white people work for all the time, and nobody is criticizing them. Certainly not the United States government declaring that they are violating some kind of Foreign Agent Registration Act. They say that that we are guilty, and of course the African movement historically has always been opposed to unjust wars that the United States has been engaged in. So this is nothing new for us. So to come up with this idea that the Russians had to pay us to do this, like they had to pay African people. The only people in our community that the United States government pay are those people who work with them to oppress our people and other people around the world. Those people who would put forth some kind of bill in the United States Congress that would punish Africa and all the people in Africa for not supporting the United States position in Ukraine. Those are the forces who get paid, not us. We get punished for our position, and that has been historically the case of what we've been dealing with. And then, of course, they said that that one of the things that helps them to really know who we are is because in 2017 and 2019, we ran campaigns. These are election campaigns based on U.S. election law. We passed every legal measure to engage in elections in this country. And so on the agenda, our campaigns revolved around reparations. Our campaigns revolved around Black community control of the police. Our campaigns revolved around smashing the gentrification that's happening to our communities throughout this country, which constitute a part of the demand of our recognition of genocide being committed against our people. And so these are the campaigns. They said the Russians paid for it. They listen, Black people, nobody in this country, in the United States, I should say, has paid the price for the right to participate in electoral vote more than Black people. Nobody. And churches in 1963, the church bombed in Birmingham, Alabama, that saw 3 little Black girls die. And so here is the United States government carrying out a similar act, except they don't use the same kinds of explosion. They come at 5 o'clock in the morning. They use flashbang grenades, which is a form of explosion, to attack us because they say we participated in elections in a way that they don't like, and somehow the Russians are responsible for that. This is what we're looking at. They said also, and I think it's really important to recognize this, that that I went to Moscow. And they said the fact that I went to Moscow is further evidence, and somehow I went to Moscow. They allege or intimate that I was going to Moscow to work for the Russians. But, you know, I went to Ireland, as I just mentioned. I went to Suriname, I just mentioned. I went to Oxford, England, because they invited me to come speak there to talk about the conditions of Africa and African people. I've gone to various places around the world. I went to Nicaragua, that the United States government is right now trying to strangle and starve. In 1980, 81, I was there when Ronald Wilson Reagan was inaugurated as president of the United States government, and where the government of the United States began a major assault on the people of Nicaragua because they had come up with a different system. They had made a revolution to overturn the colonial oppression that they were experiencing. So I didn't just go to Russia, and I didn't go to Russia to be employed by anybody. I went to Russia establishing relationships with African people. Our struggle to be free and other peoples around the world, many of whom were themselves at the time oppressed and exploited as well, not to be employed by anybody at all. And the United States just happened to have been on the wrong side of every question historically and continues to be on the wrong side today. So we've seen evidence that indictments are forthcoming. And as I mentioned earlier, as far as I'm concerned, as far as it concerns me, rather, it's like a kind of slow-moving assassination attempt. I have been in this movement where I have been handcuffed in the backseat of police cars and clubbed to near unconsciousness. I have been in a situation where I've been shot at making speeches in San Francisco. My home was firebombed in Oakland, California, almost killing my 2 children and my wife at the time. I have faced various vicious assaults, been to prison more times, jails more time than you can imagine, and spent 2.5 years total in prison for snatching a 8x10 mural off the wall of the City Hall of St. Petersburg, Florida, that depicted African people as near monkeys and various other various negative caricatures. This is what I'm guilty of. I have done those things. I have worked my whole life to make this struggle for the liberation of our people. And I am going on 100 years old. And I have never lived a single day in the 81 years of my life where African people were not being oppressed, killed, humiliated, etc. in the United States and in Africa and various other places around the world. What relationship did the United States government have in overthrowing Nkrumah in 1966? What relationship did the United States government have in hunting down like an animal, Patrice Lumumba, killing him and cutting him up in little pieces and putting him in vats of acid and then burning his body? What relationship did the United States government have to the murder of Thomas Sankara along with France? That's its partner, colonial partner, or with Robert Sobukwe in South Africa, or Steve Biko in South Africa. These are the partners of the United States, and they don't have to answer for that. And they don't even believe that you believe the charges that's being made against us. But they know that they have the guns, and so they assume that it doesn't matter whether you believe it's true or not. They have the guns, and they have this thing that they call the law that they can use against us and then justify what they do by laws that they create for the justification of what it is that they do. So here we are now. And I have a suspicion that one of the things that we will see happen is January 6th. That is tomorrow. That is the anniversary of the attack by white mobs on the U.S. Capitol to overturn the election outcome. The outcome of an election that transfer of power that happened in this in this country that destroys or challenges this notion of the U.S. being this democratic place on the shining on a city on the hill where political violence does not occur. And the only reason they can say political violence doesn't occur because they don't include the murder of Malcolm X, the murder of Martin Luther King by FBI agents who were always involved in that. They don't include the attack on the Black Panther Party. They don't include the historical attacks on the African People's Socialist Party, JOMO, the other organizations that we've been associated with, and they don't even put what they have done in Congo and other places in the equations. So they have created this notion, and they will use, if they can, the January 6th anniversary to charge and indict all kinds of people that's associated with this contradiction that exists among the colonizers themselves. And so they will have indictments, and they will have this. And I assume there's a good possibility that in addition to other factors that we have seen, that they would throw us into this process of indictments. So that people cannot distinguish African people, and Black people, and the historic struggle we have had with this country just for our freedom. They can't distinguish that from what's happening with the others associated with January 6th. And we are saying that we have to distinguish that. We are saying that people who are viewing this now, that Black people, that oppressed people, that people who can stand in solidarity with the right of African people to be free, not to have a better form of slavery, not to have some modification of colonial oppression, but Black people can be free. And that those who sympathize with that, and those who maybe don't sympathize with that, but who believe in what they characterize as free speech, freedom of assembly, that you have a responsibility to take this on so that there is no confusion to anybody. And I know that there will be attempts to silo this discussion, to keep it siloed so that the only people who would be aware of what is happening to us are people who we normally talk to, people who are part of activist communities, etc. And what I'm saying is that we have to break out of this encirclement that they've attempted to impose on us. That Zuckerberg's banning and shadow banning cannot prevail. That everyone who's participating in this discussion has a responsibility to share it, to put it out to everybody in the world, to put it out all over the world, to put it out all the contacts you have, to spread this discussion and to have discussions. This is the fundamental thing. Because what they would do, they would come at 5 o'clock in the morning so that nobody else is around, so that the people won't know what the hell is going on and won't have an explanation for it. When they come to further this assassination attempt on me, this attack on members of our party and movement, on my wife and others, when they've stolen our properties and everything else to crush the struggles that we have to make Black people free, to have independent economic capacity. When they come to do this, you must be able to say, this is what is happening. We don't unite with it, and especially white people have a responsibility to say this, that we are not down with this, that we support the right of African people to be able to protest, to be able to articulate its aims and our aims and aspirations, and the right to do that, even if you don't agree. And of course, Africans, we know, and other colonized people, we know that we exist within a colonial mode of production where the entire rotten social system of oppression and exploitation rests upon a foundation of colonialism that Karl Marx once characterized as the primitive accumulation of capital. And he also characterized this as having the same significance in political economy as original sin in theology. And you just recently heard this term original sin used by Joe Biden. And when he was quoting, I should say commanding 49 so-called heads of state from Africa just recently and in Washington, D.C. When in so doing, because he is now in competition in a contest with China and with Russia for some friendship with Africa or African people or with peoples around the world in order to obscure the history of colonialism that the United States has either participated in or supported for Africa, and to obscure the oppression of Black people in this country. He apologizes or he acknowledges, I should say, this original sin. Biden does. He talks about the original sin, and that original sin he's talking about is what has been happening to African people, some things unmentionable, unthinkable, he said, that's happened to African people who was kidnapped and brought here from Africa. He has acknowledged that. And that original sin has not gone away. The Pope just died, and they just funeralized him. And as far as I know, he did nothing to absolve the others for the original sin. And that original sin still prevails. That original sin is the reason there are political prisoners and prisoners of war. Black people, Leonard Peltier from the indigenous population, that original sin continues to exist. And you and I have to make sure that no matter what happens, that we fight back, we push them back, and that the arrest of Omali Yeshitela, the death sentence that they want to impose on me, the attack on our movement will not be the end of this movement, this struggle, that we will stand up and push back. We will destroy the colonial mode of production. African people and all the colonized peoples of the world will be free. And the African People's Socialist Party stands for this, will stand for this, and we will do everything that's necessary to win our freedom. We say, hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa, Hands off Omali Yeshitela or the sky is the limit. Uhuru.